What is your stance on the police?
The police.
Yeah.
Okay.
I feel like you almost have to ask
Yeah.
that question
No, of
nowadays
course you do.
because,
And I was talking about this the other day on the Young Democrats little Zoom thing I did. But a lot of people, especially older folks, are really afraid of that phrase, like defund the police. They think that
oh,
means
are you for that?
they think that means that. Well, we're gonna get there.
Oh man, we got to do the build up.
Well, they think that means that like you're gonna get rid of the police
Mm-hmm.
and there's just no cops anymore. And like, I'm a history teacher. I can talk to you all day long about like the inherent, systematic racist underlyings of policing and the different historical contexts of that. But like when it comes down to it, especially in a small town like Arcata, you're not going to be able to get rid of the police force. That's just it's not going to happen. There's nobody that's in support of that. They also like serve a pretty community building aspect too. Especially like in Arcata, they have like a program that APD operates that I really admire is the juvenile diversion program, where they use. I'm a teacher, so I'm trained in what's like called restorative practices, which is like the idea that like you're not just going to suspend or expel a kid. You're going to figure out what's wrong. You're going to like build them up and build a contract with them and then bring them back into their community and like monitor them, right? And so that's like what the juvenile diversion program does with the city of Arcata and with like the McKinleyville and Arcata High School is basically just like take kids that have maybe committed crimes or have, big problems at school, are going to get expelled, whatever, and kind of figure out what is the problem, create contracts with them, and kind of bring them back into society as opposed to like having them in juvenile hall and having them on parole and things like that, and giving workshops to their families and helping them out and kind of bringing them back into the community and not like ostracizing them. And I think that's like so important. And APD does a lot of good work like that. And I think that, also the Arcata Police Department doesn't need assault rifles and riot gear. So there's parts that you can take away, but there's also parts that are integral to, keeping, order and peace in Arcata. And so I think that, providing certain essential services, making sure that, if somebody's having a mental health crisis, that you're not like sending a cop there necessarily. You might be sending a mental health crisis counselor from the Department of Health and Human Services, or you might be sending a social worker that knows how to deal with that. Because oftentimes, like, we're asking police to do work that they are not trained for. Mm-hmm. And we're asking police to do a lot of things outside their scope. And I don't necessarily think that's appropriate either if the cops don't have the training for that, for us to even ask them to do those things. So I think, keeping police to the work that they're used to be doing, putting down minor disturbances, making sure that people aren't, doing these regular nuisance crimes, graffiti, peeing on the street, trying to break in cars, things like that. I think that is the necessary service that police offer, especially in a small town, right? But for other things like drug overdoses, mental health crises, domestic disputes, those are better handled by crisis counselors, mental health workers, people like that. So I think, bringing in the Department of Health and Human Services to work with our police department and taking some of that police department funding, not defunding the police completely, but, reallocating some of that police money into different resources that can help the police better deal with these problems that are happening in our community, I think is so important. And I think that's what needs to happen. On this huge scale, we hear defund the police, and that's language that's often really scary to people. But I think, taking these resources and reallocating them to kind of a more community policing model is what's really important. So
that is interesting. I've heard the argument that, you could send like a social worker to a domestic violence situation, but, what social worker is going to want to go by themselves without a police officer? Because if you send them there...
I mean, they do that.
They do that currently?
Oftentimes, I mean, if the police don't get called on a situation, or if there's or if like there's a welfare check and they're going to a welfare check and there's a problem taking place, they are the ones dealing with that.
But that seems like that
the police haven't been called.
Dangerous.
So, I mean there's always backup, and I think that the police should be there for violent crimes. I think that police should be involved for that. I think police should be, probably even more trained, as we saw with the Josiah Lawson case, that police were not necessarily trained in proper ways to take evidence and proper ways to like deal with a crime scene. Because there was some new police that were the first ones responding to that scene, and they were not trained necessarily in those proper ways to take evidence and to take witness testimony and things like that. So making sure that there is either an experienced like evidence technician, evidence person, cop on staff when these violent crimes are happening, to make sure that everything is being taken into account and all of, the different parts of a crime scene are being dealt with properly. But also, especially for nonviolent crimes and stuff, I don't think necessarily if it's in, the person who is either committing or is the victim of the crime's best interest, that, the police are the ones responding. Because a lot of times, I mean, it depends also on the disposition of the officer and, the training that they have and their level of empathy with certain situations and stuff, because humans are so different and, the way that people interact with each other are so different. You could have, a good experience with one person while the other person says, oh my God, I hate that person. They are so mean and they are horrible, So
Yeah.
everybody has different experiences with people. So just making sure that, the community's experience with either, the officers that are responding or the crisis counselors that are responding, whoever it is positive. I mean, that really creates like a positive feedback loop in your community. And if people are getting the services that they need and having positive experiences with the people that are supposed to be helping them in society, then it creates an overall better sense of community, and, there's less problems and people are less likely to cause problems in these communities too if there's positivity. So,
It seems like a lot of that ties back to training.
yeah.
And I wonder,
Huge.
I
Yeah.
think, I don't know, from my perspective, it seems like, if you cut the budget, a lot of that is it's going to hurt their ability to train. I think if anything, we should be making them train more and having like CIT training and
Well, again, it's, taking, taking a close look at a budget and seeing, where are we putting our money? Where do we want to put our money? It might not even be taking any money away from the police department, but just taking it from certain areas of it and shifting
reallocating it.
into training, into, maybe hiring a mental health counselor to work for the police department, as part of that. So it just takes a good look at the budget and seeing, what is being done here. And, the Arcata Police Department already cut their budget a lot in the face of COVID because...
So did the EPD.
Yeah.
By like $1 million or
same
something.
with Arcata. Yeah.
Jesus. Well,
they're getting Arcata Police Department's budget is like $6.2 million a year. It's a lot of money that they, to staff officers, to staff office staff, they do vehicle abatement, animal control, like I said, the juvenile diversion, like a lot of different things like that. So there's a lot of different departments with underneath the umbrella of the police department, but
staffing was hard to begin with. I don't think EPD ran full staffed. I don't think the county ran full staffed. And I can't imagine after all this, a lot of people are going to be rushing out to, push the black and blue. I think it's going to be tough territory.
Well, and I think, again, it depends on what happens in November, but I think there already is a lot of push on like the national scale and from, national police unions and stuff to start implementing some reform. And especially in Arcata too, the police chief is very open to the idea of like community review and the community being involved in decisions that the police are making and being involved in looking at the police budget. And, the city of Arcata's police chief is very open to that and is very welcoming to community involvement in that. So I think that's going to be a big first step in just kind of looking at the department, looking at the budget, and trying to just make Arcata the safest and most comfortable place for citizens possible. So I think it's important to do that.
I did not know that those were new cops on the Josiah case. That seems like that speaks volumes on training. That like they need you shouldn't send anybody out.
Right after that, they put a lot of they implemented a lot of changes. After that, the city outrage in response to the Lawson case with training and making sure that, certain cops have oversight, and if they're not fully trained yet, making sure that they have somebody that they're working with to keep them in check and things like that. So